Thank you for joining us and welcome to episode number 8 of the series. My name is Benjamin Brain. I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes or so, and this is The Truth About Business. Welcome to The Truth About Business, where it's my mission to seek out real-life business champions and explore and share their challenges, setbacks, failures, and triumphs to serve as inspiration, motivation, and help other like-minded business people and entrepreneurs like us to fast-track our own success. In this week's episode, we talk to Chloe Maudsley. Once a high-performance athlete herself competing at a world level in karate, Chloe now heads up the operations at the Derbyshire Institute of Sport, which hunts down the best amateur sporting talent in the county and pushes them through to the very top of their sport, competing in world competitions, the Olympics and beyond. Being the only business of its kind in the UK, the DIS relies on sponsorships from businesses to support their roster of 30 elite athletes. And with big plans to take their model nationwide, this conversation is a fascinating look at the parallels between the high-performance sporting world and business. Amongst many other things in this episode, you'll discover, number 1, the beliefs and attitudes that separate truly high-performance individuals from the rest of us. Number 2, if being a high performer is something that you're just born with or whether you can develop it later on in life. And number 3, how the team at DIS approaches telling athletes who have dedicated their entire life to their sport that they're no longer good enough to be on the programme. And there's much, much more. To find out more about Chloe and the team, you can visit them online at www.derbyshireis.co.uk or follow them on Twitter at DerbyshireIS. This was another brilliant business interview with an inspirational business champion that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I hope you do too. You know, success leaves footprints. So let's take a walk with former elite athlete and head of operations at the Derbyshire Institute of Sport, Chloe Maudsley. Right, morning, Chloe. Thank you for joining us on the podcast this morning. Really pleased to have you on with The Truth About Business.
Thanks very much, Ben.
So, for the audience that might not know, can you give us a bit of a summary of what you guys are all about at the Derbyshire Institute of Sport?
Sure. So what our ultimate aim is to get athletes from Derbyshire onto world-class funded programmes.
Can you give us a bit of an overview of your career leading up to the launch of Derbyshire Institute of Sport?
Sure. So in terms of career-wise, from a young age, I was involved in sport and did some coaching and also voluntary work within the clubs. I then went through the education pathway, did my degree in sport development and coaching, got a job following that within British Triathlon, doing sport development, then moved to Derbyshire, started doing some work in the education sector in sport, then moved into youth sport, then worked as the talent pathways manager in sport, and then finally ended up in Derbyshire Institute of Sport.
So you've been involved in sport from very early on?
Very much, yeah.
And was your ambition from those days to have a career as a sports person?
Yeah, so my actual sport was karate, so I knew that was never going to be a completely professional athlete in that particular sport, particularly because in previous years it wasn't an Olympic sport at all as it is for next year. But my plan was always just to work in sport. Your
business here, Derbyshire Institute of Sport, you're a CIC. Can you tell us what that stands for and a bit of an idea of what that's all about?
Yeah, sure. So CIC is a community interest company. So the purpose of it is for companies who are set up that aren't for profit. They're not in the private world, but they're not quite in the charitable world either. So when we first set DIS up, it was just all around the really elite athletes at the very top of the game. And as a result of that, we couldn't be seen as charitable. However, as the programme has now kind of moved on, there's a lot more that we do at different levels. And as a result, at the moment, we're looking to transform into a charitable incorporated organisation.
So you work with some real elite amateur athletes. Just talk to us a bit about how you actually generate income as a business, because obviously we're not talking professional here where they might be able to get sponsored by a big brand and make millions. It's not quite that sort of playing field.
No, that's right. So it's almost the purpose of why we set DIS up is because of these athletes that are national, junior, international level, don't receive any kind of funding whatsoever. And also the cost that they're spending themselves, they'll easily be spending £10,000, £15,000, £20,000 per year individually to compete, to train, for their equipment, to travel, etc., etc. So the reason we set DIS up is to provide a wraparound service, to give them everything that we possibly could, free of charge, to get them onto a world-class funded programme. So for us, our sponsors and supporters are absolutely crucial because their money goes direct to supporting athletes to make that transition.
Is it against the rule book to sponsor an amateur athlete? So are there some out there that will get sponsorships?
It's very few and far between, to be honest, Ben. So most athletes of the level that we're supporting, businesses don't seem to be that keen to support them yet because they don't know if they're going to make it. So it's a high-risk strategy because high-performance sport is high risk anyway. You know, I think most athletes that get sponsored have already won a really prestigious international medal. For example, one of our athletes, Neve Emerson, as soon as she won Commonwealth Games, or even just slightly before that, she is sponsored by Nike and possibly a few others.
But until they get on the radar of those big companies, they're pretty much self-funding themselves.
Absolutely, or their parents are, because these are young people that can't really get a full-time job because they're busy training all the time. So there'll be young people still in education or with a part-time job.
So do you find then that there may be people out there with incredible talent and commitment and work ethic, but because their family may not necessarily generate the income that they need to perform at the top level because there is a lack of funding, we potentially miss out on some great athletes because of that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't know the statistics on all of that, but I would imagine that there will be a few athletes out there that do just have to stop doing what they love doing because finance isn't available to them, you know, and that's why we want to absolutely keep the service that we provide to athletes free of charge for them, because we know it's the bit that they definitely need to make the difference. But at the same point, if they were to pay for it, it would cost the athlete around about £6,500 a year to be on DIS with the service that we offer.
So you've talked about businesses sponsoring DIS rather than the individual athletes that you have on board. What sort of things do the businesses get that sponsor you? What's the benefits for them?
The first thing is the reason why they would sponsor the whole business as opposed to just one athlete is for the business, it reduces any risk. So because we support 30 athletes on our programme, you're not just investing in one athlete who may get injured or may drop out of the sport for a number of reasons. You've always got a backup. You've also know as a business that we've already tried and tested the market. We know which athletes are the best and we know which ones have got the potential to be successful. So you haven't got to think, oh, is this one person that's coming to me, you know, of the level or not?
Yeah, you're not putting
You've
your
got
eggs in
that
one
security
basket.
that we've got a team here that actually know there's pathways in performance sport. So straight away, you've got PR reasons, really. So you've got a connection into really high performance sport, innovation, being the best. You know, our athletes and team can create great imagery and stories around that culture of being world class. So that's something that businesses can get from us if they sponsor us. As well as that, it's the connection in, so they can get to hear from our staff and athletes about what it takes to be high performance, which I know we're going to talk about a bit later, and the sort of connections with business. We'll also give them opportunities for CSR reasons, so companies that really want to demonstrate that they are having an impact on their local community, whether they want to do that to help write tenders or to win awards. Things like sponsoring a company like us can really help with that. And also our actual services. So businesses that sponsor us, they could access our work-ready dietitian, can go in and look at all of the health of the staff within the workplace. We've also got a psychologist that runs a programme called Spotlight, which is a whole psychological profiling tool for businesses, as well as kind of bespoke courses that we could do for businesses. You know, as if a business comes to us of, oh, you know, we've got a lot of young people involved, just not motivated enough. What kind of messages can you give them? Could be something like that. Or it could be that we might manage a team building day for you guys, for businesses, with the use of our athletes, for example. So there's kind of a whole range of reasons as to why what we can offer as an organisation for sponsors to feel that their money is really good value.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not just helping the next generation reach their true potential. There's a lot in it for the businesses that are sponsoring you as well. It does sound like a really great cause to be involved with. So you've talked about obviously working with the athletes to get them to that world stage. What are some of the services that you provide for the athletes when they do come on board?
What we've spent years doing is researching what they get on offer at world-class programme level. So that's what we try and then replicate, because essentially that's the transition pathway. So we offer strength and conditioning, physiotherapy, sports psychology, sports nutrition, general athlete lifestyle, as well as promotion and marketing for the actual athlete. So we try to provide a really holistic approach to develop an athlete on every single level of what they need to then become a world-class athlete.
How much are the chances increased by working with the DIS of actually making it to that world level?
So from our perspective, we say that their chances are significantly increased because of the fact that most athletes don't necessarily understand what the journey is that they're trying to go on to. It's very complex in high performance sport, so every sport selects and deselects differently. So there's trust in the knowledge that we already know that. So as soon as they come on the programme, we know what their steps are that they're taking. As well as that, they're getting obviously all the support in terms of strength and conditioning, physio, psych and nutrition. When they move on to a world-class programme, there'll be an expectation that they're already good at a lot of those things. Well, without the support of DIS, they wouldn't necessarily know all of those things. One thing that's really important for us is about preparing the athlete to do their sport so that when they do go on to world-class level and the volume is significantly increased, the body is able to cope with those increased demands. And again, the same for things like on a psychological perspective. You know, they're going to go from in Derbyshire being one of our most amazing athletes to then being at the bottom of the ladder again when they move on to world-class programmes. So how do they deal with that? Very importantly for us as well, and sport in general, is about preparing athletes for life after sport. So the whole kind of athlete lifestyle piece for us is really critical, just to keep our athletes in a strong-minded place to know that sport isn't the only thing in life. They have to think about other things because the chances of making it are slim, but also when you have made it, then obviously you finish high-performance sports still at a very young age and you've got to think about your career after.
And with regards to what you guys do, obviously we hear a lot of sport is government-funded and a lot of what makes the Olympics relies on the backing supported by the government and government bodies, whereas you guys are breaking away from that. Is there anybody else that offers a similar service, or are you the only ones?
At the moment, I believe that we're the only company in the UK that services athletes in this particular way.
And why do you think that is?
Well, a lot of it is because, you know, within the national governing bodies, whilst they do get government funding, they need all of that at the very top level. So there isn't enough money almost to go down to the level that we're supporting. So that their money comes from UK sport, and then the other end of the spectrum is the Sport England money that goes into grassroots sport. And for us, that's what we identified when we did our research, is that there was this whole gap in the middle of support for athletes of the level that we're talking. In terms of why other counties don't do it, I would imagine it's simply money. A lot of the funding that was originally going into sport is now moving into physical activity and health as well. So it just really leaves it open for athletes to just try and make it themselves, which is obviously what we didn't want to happen in Derbyshire.
So where does the motivation from your side of things come from to actually be the first business that offers this sort of service to athletes?
I think my personal motivation is about the benefits that you get from being involved in sport. So that's first and foremost at the heart of it. I absolutely love sport. I love every single thing that it does. And I really believe that sport gives you so much from a physical, psychological, emotional and social perspective. So for me, if athletes kind of go down that journey and can be as high as they possibly can be, then that's a great success for us, really. In terms of being the only business that do it, I think we were just in a really fortunate position at the time that we were in a position that we could do it. And, you know, the plan really in the future is to share it around and possibly talk to other counties about whether they can do it as well, because our ultimate aim is that GB wins the Olympic medal table year on year.
So the business itself is very entrepreneurial. Have you always had a sort of entrepreneurial flair from your own background and history? Were there any signs earlier on that you would become this entrepreneur running the one-of-a-kind business that it is?
I don't think so. No, I don't think I ever really saw myself as an entrepreneur, if I'm honest.
Do you see yourself now?
I don't know if I do, actually. I definitely see myself as a leader. I've always been a leader, no matter what I've done, whether it's in sport or at school or whatever. I've always been I kind of like to be a leader. I'm a bit of a control freak, if I'm honest. I kind of like to be the one helping people to get to where they're going. I think that's one of my skills. But as an entrepreneur, I don't know, maybe. My brother is an entrepreneur. He's set up his own business that was from his kind of bedroom to now a big company. So maybe some of his genes have come across a bit.
Okay, good answer. And how many athletes are you looking after at the moment?
Currently support 30 athletes on the programme across a range of sports.
Any names we might know of?
So I guess you would know more of our ambassadors that have moved off the programme. So that would be Neve Emerson, Commonwealth Games heptathlete, Charlie Tanfield and Harry Tanfield, both cyclists, one on British Cycling, one professional cyclist, Liam Pitchford, 12 in the world table tennis, and possibly Jay Clark, who competed against Roger Federer in Wimbledon in the summer.
Wow, okay. So, some real successful athletes then behind the scenes coming from the DIS. Yeah. It's amazing. It's, we were talking earlier before we had this conversation that similar to businesses sometimes, you look from an outsider's perspective and everything looks good, the business is doing well, there's a strong brand, but behind the scenes, it's chaotic. There's always things going wrong. There's always problems to address. There's always solutions that need to be found. There's staff leaving, staff issues, marketing, sales, etc. Is that the same for some of your sports teams? You see them standing on the podium and it's easy to think that, sometimes, they've been an overnight success. They've had all this training and funding. Life's good for them. Is that what you tend to find?
Yeah, I think so. I think possibly to the general public, it would look like, an athlete's having a really lovely life and they've won a 400-metre hurdles, let's say, for example, and they've got on the podium and everything's fine. And what they wouldn't have known is that, they've been to numerous competitions, had to stay in bedrooms with 3 or 4 other athletes to look after money, really bad conditions necessarily. They've had to kind of use all their wages to travel there. They've got things going on at home. Possibly mum or dad isn't really wanting them to continue because they want them to get a proper job, for example. So there's all those kind of things that are going on within the athlete's head that actually obviously going to affect their performance, that they've got to be able to blank out so that they can do what they love and want to do. Yeah,
and I suppose, especially at a younger age, the support of parents has got to be a real contributing factor. They have to be, I presume, driving them to training, Absolutely. Taking them to competitions. So I suppose after, a few good years of that, there are some parents, I would imagine, that just think we've had enough of this now. We want our own life back because I suppose they've got to commit a lot of their life to it as well.
Absolutely. Most of our athletes will be training 6 to 8 times every single week and then competitions on top of that and going to school. So, really, as a parent, being one now myself, I think that, you basically spend a lot of your time in your car.
So going back to the business of DIS,
yeah,
you've obviously been in operation as the CIC since 2017. You're the first business of your kind, as we've talked about. What was the biggest challenge during that first year, would you say?
I think the biggest challenge really was understanding what we've got on offer for sponsors to come on board, because our background and mine and the majority of my staff are all about developing high-performance athletes, not necessarily from a sales background at all. So it's really looking at what have we got on offer that businesses would really value to be able to invest money and for us to give them something back that they think is that value.
You've put a lot of work into that from the answer that you gave earlier. It sounds like you've got a really solid proposition now. So has that helped you with finding sponsors to bring on board?
Absolutely,
that strong USP?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it definitely seems to. We seem to be getting a really good kind of traction with sponsors and supporters now. And I think because we can offer businesses really different levels to join us, whether it's £500 as a supporter or a sponsorship that starts from £1,000, I feel like we've got an offer that can engage most local companies at any particular level, really, or even as an individual person. We have some individuals that just want to connect with us, really, because they value what it is that we're doing. I don't think there's that many charities out there that have got a really positive story that people can use. Most of them are obviously really upsetting charities, which is understandable, whereas companies that want something a bit slightly different from a charity, then I think that's the position in what we're able to offer.
For people that want to help put Derbyshire on the map, particularly in the sporting world, that's something that you guys are really contributing to as well.
Absolutely, and it's within our kind of purpose statement that it's about getting athletes onto world-class programmes, but in doing so, it's about making Derbyshire proud. You know, we're really proud to be in this county, and we really want to showcase that Derbyshire can be the best county in the UK.
What was the biggest lesson that you learned from those first 12 months?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest lesson that I learned within the first 12 months of kind of going out, particularly to sponsors, was to just ask. You know, and not kind of be afraid of what their answer might be. You know, if the answer's no, that's fine. And it's the same sort of lessons that you learn in performance sport. If the result doesn't go the way you want, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't at least try. So I think it's that really, just going out and asking people and genuinely just being confident to talk about what our business is and what the offer is. If people don't want to take it on, then that's fine. It's not a reflection on the business as such.
Yeah, it's nothing personal.
No.
It's just a business decision.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know about Chloe's journey to starting DIS. We know about what you do and how you're helping athletes to reach that world level. So I'd like to get into some of the high performance stuff now, because I think there's a lot of crossover between that elite sports world and business as well. So from your perspective and from your own experience and from working with loads and loads of elite athletes, what do you think it is that separates a high performance person from the rest of us?
I think the biggest thing is definitely attitude. So it's the attitude that you have towards life in general, but within sport for our athletes, it's that just go out and do it kind of attitude. It's the fact that you've got kind of one goal in place and you are going to just go out and do that, and there isn't anything that's going to stand in your way to change that.
And where do you think that attitude comes from? Is it something that people are just born with? Is it, the old argument, nature versus nurture? Is there an event in your life, in people's lives, that you find suddenly triggers this inspiration to be the best at what they do? Where does it come from?
So there has been some research done with kind of super elite athletes that have consecutively won gold medal after gold medal that suggests that they've all had some trauma in their life. So some significant event happening from a youngest age that's kind of then given this kind of psychological trait to be determined to win. So there is some research out there about that. But then I do believe that some people are just kind of born with that attitude. I don't know whether it is nature, nurture. I really don't know, to be honest. But it is the most crucial factor for us to look at whether they're actually going to achieve or not.
Okay, and a big part of what I do is for myself wanting to become a high performance person. Would you say it's possible to become a high performance person maybe later on in life, whether it's to do with sports or business, and adopting the mindsets and the attitudes and the behaviours that it takes to be that sort of person? Or is it you're either one or you're not?
I'm no science doctor, but I think similar to physical capabilities, psychological capabilities can be trained. So I think it is about that habit and psychologically training yourself to think, no, just do it, just do it, just do it, just do it. Or whatever it happens, the bit that you might be missing or not. I think you can train it. I think people can become high performance.
That's good to know.
That's
good to know. And what are some of the challenges that you face in dealing with high performance people?
Yeah, so I guess the challenge is that they are so obsessive and so driven that there is an element of kind of just bringing them back down to earth a little bit. But to be the best in the world, you've definitely got to have that obsession, and motivation is what we would term it, I guess, more than obsession. I think for most people, you'd think that working with performance athletes is a dream because they attend every session, they do everything that you say, they're completely on that journey, they know where they're going. On the flip side, what you'll get with an elite athlete is constantly being questioned. So our strength and conditioning coach will constantly get from an athlete, well, why am I doing that? How is that going to help me swim faster? Which is really good, and it's something that we particularly promote. But it means that you've really got to know the detail as to why you're telling an athlete to do something, because they fixate on every single point that you say. And it's why it's so important that our staff are from a performance background themselves, because all of those critical conversations that you have with athletes, they completely take it, because every single second, every % of what you're talking about matters.
And we've talked about going from being a non-high performance person to a high performance person. Have you seen it go the other way? So you've had people on the program that have had massive potential that, you know, could easily make it to world stage, but all of a sudden things start to slacken, suddenly mindsets, attitude, behaviours change in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it. So some athletes transition along that kind of journey when they're going through to university, and they decide that actually they'd rather take their career somewhere forward, or it could be that the parent pressure is taken off, and so as a result they don't necessarily want to do it. But also I've seen it from athletes that have been right at the top and then have decided they just don't want to do that anymore. You know, you have to make a real choice to be in high performance sport. It's not a nice game. You know, there's a lot of brutality around it. So at any point, athletes can decide that actually they just want to get off that train and get some normality in life.
And so what are some of the things that you guys here do to get the best out of your high performers, to keep them on that level and to keep them working towards these massive ambitions and goals that they've got?
Yes, I think the things for us really is trying to make their whole experience really fun and enjoyable. You know, we are dealing with young people at the end of the day, and this is a choice that they do in sport. You know, their parents are investing a lot of money into it, and our sponsors are investing into it. So, you know, first and foremost, they've got to really love and enjoy what they're doing. So we try and create a really kind of family feel, social element to the training that we offer our athletes, whilst also being really serious about the actual work that's being done. So I think that's really important to us. And
one of the things that fascinates me about the athletes that you work with is we talk in business of having, you know, weekly goals, monthly goals, quarterly goals. But for some of your guys, they've got aspirations of winning the Olympics in 10, 12 years' time, which absolutely fascinates me. How do they stay committed to such a long-term goal, knowing the effort that they have to put in, day out? And I've seen one of the schedules from one of your top swimmers, and she's only 16, but it is relentless. So to be doing that for year upon year upon year, it must take some dedication and commitment.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it, you know, partly comes back to that original question around what is it that you're looking at, and it is that whole attitude that with those athletes, that is what they're driven by. So in terms of how do we kind of keep them motivated and keep them on track, that's not a job that we have to play, because they're already motivated and on track and everything else. Really, I think the job that we have to play with them is just making sure that those steps are the right steps to take, and also continuing to educate them around, well, what if it doesn't go to plan, and what if that doesn't happen in the way that you're expecting it to happen. So that's a really important piece for us. The motivation with athletes, it's just in them. It is why they're doing what they're doing. And as soon as we see that they don't have it, then the chances are they would come off the programme.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was listening to something the other day, and they said a similar line, in the fact that you cannot motivate people. People cannot be motivated by outside influences. So ultimately, if that person internally isn't motivated themselves, then there's nothing you can do about that.
Absolutely. You know, I think, you know, with young people particularly, there's all talk of prizes and rewarding, and you definitely get taught it as a parent, reward positive behaviour and all those kind of things. But when you get to kind of being an athlete, those rewards are meaningless. It is all completely internal, and, you know, we'd talk a lot with our athletes around process. So they're not focusing on winning an Olympic gold. What they're focusing on is what time they need to achieve that.
The athletes that you have on the programme, they obviously have, you know, regular competitions that are leading up to these massive events like the Olympics. Do you tend to find that, obviously you've said they're very focused on the process with regards to getting the right times, etc. But is their motivation or their focus on the next competition, or do they just see each sort of competition as a milestone along the way to reaching that ultimate goal of gold at the Olympics or whatever else it may be?
So let's take Mia Slevin that you met the other day, a swimmer. So she would be looking at probably Olympics in 2028, possibly 2024. So a long time ahead. So that will be in her head. But throughout the year, she'll be involved in numerous competitions, but she'll only be focusing on 2 or 3 as an absolute ones to really peak for. So there'll be certain competitions that athletes go for just for training. They might try something new, they might try a different technique, they might try a different tactic to what they're actually doing, whereas at certain points in the year, they'll put themselves under the pressure to make sure that they perform, and there'll be only, say, 2 or 3 of them throughout the year that they'll want to do that.
And why is that? Is it like a fuel tank where you only have a certain amount of top performance fuel in you and you can exhaust it quickly, so you have to spread it out throughout the year wisely?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you imagine cycling on an indoor static bike, you can only go maximal effort for a certain time. You can't just consistently do that effort. So with training, it's really important, rest, recovery, rehabilitation. So you've got to plan your whole year out in terms of what are the times where you need to overload in terms of strength and conditioning, for example. What times do you need to have a bit of a low time, a bit of a rest, and what times you need to actually peak, because you can't stay at a consistent level.
Okay, yeah, there's just so much going on behind the scenes, isn't there? There's such a scientific and...
There is, and obviously what we've also got to take into consideration is what's happening in their life. When are they doing their exams? Is there something big happening at home? Are the parents, sisters and brothers getting married, for example? There's big life events that are happening that have to also be planned into this kind of structure of what it is that they're trying to achieve that particular year.
Yeah, so it's not just like there's a one template for everybody. It's
Absolutely
very individual
not.
And tailored to each athlete. Now, I've recently attended one of your Connect events here at Derby Uni, which was fascinating, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on and how people can get involved. But one of the things that you were talking about was the psychological profiling, which I think is quite prevalent in businesses now. For example, we've done DISC profiling on some of our managers, which gives you recommendations of how to deal with individuals under circumstances. It's not really anything we've then taken forward and really taken a big interest in, but I know it's something that you guys are quite heavy on. So how does psychological profiling and working out how to deal with each individual as an individual bring about benefits for an elite athlete, a top performer, and what you guys do here?
Sure. Well, just going back to kind of your point in terms of having done it and then kind of not really going into action, like with anything, you've got to train it and you've got to spend a lot of time going through every single element to be better at it. Do you know what I mean? And that's what we focus on with our athletes. So we'll look at the psychological profiling when an athlete first comes on the programme, and we'll look at them against some of the attributes that we've kind of researched in terms of what creates a high performance athlete. And then we'll look at them on a scale against each of those particular attributes. What we then do, we've got a psychology workbook that we'll go through with each athlete on a completely individual basis to develop those particular skills. So whether it's motivation, commitment, self-regulation, and the others that we have involved in there. And then each athlete kind of goes through a whole journey of getting to know themselves better and developing those psychological traits so that, again, when they then progress on to world class, they know that they're absolutely ready from a psychological perspective.
And can you give any examples of how you may have to deal with different people under similar circumstances? So, for example, I think most people might have the impression that to be a gold medalist, you're going to be an outgoing, confident person with ultimate self-belief. But as you've said, behind the scenes, you've got people who are totally obsessed. You've got people who have different motivations for wanting to be the best. Like, what are some of the intricacies of dealing with those?
Even though the motivation does come from internal, they are completely different reasons. But more than that, it's actually about them, just their general personality traits. So if they are really introvert, being on the world stage is something that particularly scares them. So obviously that's a process that we've kind of got to go through. I think for us, the most important thing is working with them completely individually and getting support from a sports psychologist so that we know that we're directing the athletes in the right way. But a lot of it is just around the personal support and care that we give to our athletes so that they are able to be open and honest about the skills we're trying to develop.
Yeah, and it must be so much more time consuming working with your athletes as individuals on that sort of basis. But you obviously find that the results are worth putting that time investment in.
Absolutely, and that's why, we really limit our programme to 30 athletes. We know that there's a lot of other talent in Derbyshire. We know that, not possibly of this level, but at the moment, we've only got the resource to deal with 30 because we want to give them that absolute personal support.
Coming back to the crossover between sports and business, sometimes, unfortunately, businesses have to let people go. And for that individual, it's obviously a terrible time. They've got to tell their family, they've got to find new employment. When you guys let somebody go, you're not just releasing them from the programme. In effect, you're telling them that their dreams are no longer achievable. How do you deal with giving such devastating news to somebody who's so far spent their whole life committed to that one goal that they're no longer ever going to achieve?
The good thing with athletes is they're quite true to themselves. So we know where they are, they know where they are, we can compare them against other athletes of a similar kind of level, and it only really takes a conversation with an athlete for them to realise themselves that they're not as good as what they need to be. So I think a lot of the time for us, we'll ask questions to the athlete and it's almost up to them to kind of make the realisation that actually they're not good enough.
So when it comes to that point of saying we can no longer have you on the programme, it's not a surprise to them. They know themselves because of the conversations that you've had and the times they've been producing, etc., up to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely on the majority of cases. That I would say in all the years that we have been running, there has been occasional ones where they have been shocked by it, but often that's been down to parents telling them that they're absolutely brilliant and everything's going well, as opposed to the athlete really knowing the level that they're at. So it's never a nice thing to do, but the reality is that it's much more cruel to keep an athlete going on that journey when you know that it's not right for them. If you keep telling somebody that it's fine when what they're doing it isn't, then they'll keep believing that they can do what they're doing.
So that is obviously a very tough conversation, and a lot of business is about being honest and having tough conversations and giving honest feedback. So how do you approach that conversation with the athlete? Where would you have that conversation? How would you start it?
So for us, it's not just right, the decision's been made, this is going to happen, let's have the conversation. This will be a process that we're going on. So as soon as an athlete comes onto our programme, we're constantly talking to them, constantly monitoring them, and we're constantly working with them on an individual basis. So for us, it's almost kind of a natural conversation that unfolds. There's a sort of a time frame within an athlete's journey that we'll kind of sit down, and part of our review process almost, where are you at? Where do you feel that you're at? What do you think you've achieved this year? Are you still on this journey, etc., etc.? All those sorts of conversations that are completely then driven by the athlete saying what they believe. And as I say, ultimately, if you facilitate the right questions, the athlete will already identify for themselves that they're not quite good enough.
So it's about regularly having those honest conversations and asking the right questions, and that makes it much easier should it come to the point of having to release them.
Yeah, and I think, for us, we really actually care about the athletes. We invest a lot of time in them and we speak to them on a daily basis. So we wouldn't want to upset anybody necessarily, but equally, we don't want them going down a path that they don't necessarily want to go on or they're not good enough to go on.
So you're working with some of the top sports people in the country. From your own experience and from all of the athletes that you work with, how much of it is down to talent, the naturally gifted athletes who just have a knack for it, versus hard work?
It's all hard work. There is no getting behind that. Nobody is naturally born able to play tennis. There's a lot of time and effort that goes in, and a lot of it is the journey that they've been on to make them the athlete that they are.
We often hear of overnight successes, but I suppose it's the same thing. An overnight success, you haven't seen the decades of work, blood, sweat and tears that they've had to put into it, like you say, yet that you haven't seen the competitions that they've been to, the disappointment that they've had, the trials and the tribulations.
No, you just see what's in the press. You just see somebody from nowhere or almost winning, but there is a lot that's gone in, and athletes don't just appear out of nowhere. There is a lot of hard work that goes into it, and the time that they spend in their sport is it ultimately what comes out. We had a talk a couple of years ago with Adam Peaty, and people were asking him, what is the secret? And he said it's just that every session he goes to, he trains really hard. He doesn't miss a training session. He trains and trains and trains and trains, and it's hard work, and that's what's got him to Olympic gold.
Yeah, I suppose regardless of your circumstances and your situation, one thing that you can always do is out-train the competition, and that's what you find it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, you can only control what you're doing at the end of the day. So it's up to you how much you want to train and how much you want to put into it.
Okay, so you've got a good perspective on both sides of the spectrum. You've been an elite sports person yourself. You work with elite sports people, but you're also heavily involved in business. What are some of the attributes or behaviours or mindsets of an athlete that you think would transfer nicely into the business world?
Sure. So I think that the first and foremost one has to be the goal setting. So having a big goal and making sure that you achieve it, not worrying about kind of change along the way. I think that's also something that you learn from performance sport. You can't control every element of it, so there are always changes along the way that you have to make. I think a big thing from performance sport is taking good calculated risks and not seeing them as a reason to stop, but actually looking at what the risk is. Can you afford to take the risk or can you not? And taking that approach that, risks can be a really great thing to do. Beliefs is obviously essential from a high performance athlete. You have to believe that you can do it yourself first and foremost. And I think for me, moving into the world of business, from day one, you have to think, yes, I can be that, I can do that kind of role. You may not have thought you could in the past, but once you're given that opportunity, you've got to believe that you can, and you've got to be 100% driven to then make sure that belief is true. I think the whole kind of philosophy of just make it happen, just do it, that's something from a performance background that directly relates into business. If you're going to do it, just do it.
Can you give us some examples from an athlete's perspective of where that just do it attitude comes into play?
A lot of our athletes train early morning. So, the attitude is you just get up and actually do it. You don't think about the time of the day. You don't think about what you did the night before. You don't think about the weather conditions. You just get up and you just do it. And it's the same with every training session. You just get on and do it. None of our athletes will say they enjoy every single training session, but they know that they've just got to do it. They've got to put themselves on the line. And even in terms of competition, some athletes don't like the whole crowd, lots of people looking at them, but they love what they're doing. So they've just got to get on the line and just race, just run as fast as they can and just do it.
And I suppose you've already given me part of the answer with this one, which is just do it. But if you had to summarise all of your experience and time working with high performance people, and you could give maybe 2 or 3 tips on working with high performance people, getting the best out of them, how to pick them up when they're not feeling great, what would you advise to business owners listening?
Sure. I think one of the things that we've not necessarily touched on so far is removing everything that we would call a sapper. So anything that reduces the energy, anything that kind of affects the environment in a negative way, remove it straight away.
Can you give some examples?
Don't waste time. If someone walks into your training gym from an athlete perspective and the mindset isn't that they want to train as well as they possibly can, take them out of that space, because you don't want them to have the effect on all the other people in there. From a kind of business world, if you've got someone that's regularly just not pulling their weight, that's the one that's constantly gossiping within the team, that's constantly moaning about things that are happening, just remove them. Take them out of the space, because, that negative energy always has an impact on everyone else. You're almost only as strong as your weakest person, and that really, for us, is important. Obviously, just do it. I don't want to keep going on about that, but it is kind of a crucial element as to why people are so successful, is they just get on and do it. And
is that an attribute or an attitude that you guys promote to the rest of the team as well? So you encourage them to have that attitude of just do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is that whole thing of not fearing failure as well, sort of comes into that. Just have a go, just do it. Just don't think about what the kind of consequences could be either way. Just do it. I can't say it enough times.
And something that we've not really touched on is the coaching aspect of things. So from your perspective, and again, there's going to be a lot of crossover between sport and business here, what do you think makes a good coach? What do you think makes a good person who can go in there and get the best out of people?
For me, obviously, I've been around coaches all my life. So the best coaches are the people that really listen and empathise. And for themselves as people, have got a real growth mindset. So that people that don't believe that they have all the answers, that still feel that they're trying to grow as people, as well as trying to help grow you. People that are really honest and are able to tell you exactly the truth about you and ideally give you some great tips on how to improve. But first and foremost, the coach has to be somebody that you trust to be able to kind of share the intimacies of what's going on in your head.
We've talked about, obviously, a lot of what goes on at the DIS, but in terms of the attributes that you feel it takes to be successful in business in general, what would you say some of those are? Obviously, we know the first one's going to be just do it. Anything else that you've picked up on?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is not to kind of take it all on yourself and really trust in other people around you. Seek out people that are already doing something similar in terms of things like sponsorship or running a business, for example, and just get their advice and opinions and learn from other people what they're doing, really. That's, I think, what I've done over the last few months, really. I had no idea how to run a business. So I just went out and asked people and learnt from others that do it really well.
What do you think some of the misconceptions are from people who aren't in that position have about being a business owner?
I guess people think that it's a really luxury position, that everybody just knows definitely what they're doing. They must know what they're doing because they own a business. They must have all the answers because they own their own business. That's not necessarily, obviously, the case. And I guess people think that if you own your own business, you've got a fabulous lifestyle where you get to come and go as and when you please. And again, that's not the reality.
So when I was looking through some of your social media accounts, which are great, by the way, definitely recommend giving the team at DIS a follow. I'll give all the links at the end. Was a phrase I came across, which is pressure is a privilege. And that really resonated with me. That's not something I've heard before. Can you give a bit of an explanation of what you mean by that?
If you're in a pressured situation, then you've obviously done something well enough to be in that pressured situation. So for our athletes, for example, if they're about to take part in a badminton match, they're feeling under pressure to win that match. It's because a coach has believed in them to put them in that situation. You don't just be put under pressure for no reason. Same in business, really. You've obviously done something well enough to be put in a position to be put under pressure. So we definitely see pressure as a privilege.
What are some of the sacrifices that you've had to make to be in the position that you're in now with the DIS?
Yeah, so I guess running the business just means that there's a lot less time that I have to spend with my family. I've got 2 young girls, so there's times where I can't pick them up from school or I can't do various activities with them because I am focusing on trying to make the business work.
And so that time investment that you've had to put into growing the business to where it is now, has it taken a lot more time than you originally anticipated?
Yeah, 100%, which is partly of my own doing, because we know how much the business can grow, and because we're so passionate about what we're trying to do here, I'm personally very invested into it to make it the best business that it can be. Again, just because of my background, really. Don't want it just to be an okay business. I do want it to be the best.
Do you switch off?
Probably don't really switch off, to be honest, because I do love what I do. So, I've always worked in sport. I love it. My husband works in sport. So in our house, we just talk about sport. I think if you're gonna run a business and you want it to be really successful, then it is kind of a 24/7 job.
Do you read, Chloe?
I do read, yeah.
Business books?
Not really.
Okay.
Sports books.
Okay, there might be some good crossover there then. If you could pick one that you would recommend to a business owner, is there one that stands out?
I think the book that I used to read over and over is Will It Make the Boat Go Faster?
Okay, and what's the takeaway from that one?
So it's written by Sir Steve Redgrave after his kind of GB rowing days. And it is about getting rid of everything that you don't need, and basically every single thing that you do, is it going to make you achieve what you want to achieve? And I think if you think of a boat along the water, it's kind of good imagery. You know, will it make the boat move faster? And if it doesn't, stop doing it and change and do something else.
And going back to 21-year-old Chloe, if you could visit her and give her one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it is, just believe in yourself, just do it, and try not to think about the consequences. Remove negative people out of the way, and just get on and do it.
Great advice. What's been your proudest moment so far?
That's a difficult one for me because, every athlete that we progress on makes us really proud. So I guess a really proud moment for us is probably one of our original athletes, Liam Pitchford, who's currently ranked 12th in the world now for table tennis, but he did a really, really good piece with Bernardo's around mental health and the effect that has on athletes. So I think that would be definitely up there as one of the proudest moments.
Okay. Biggest success so far?
Biggest success is the business continuing to kind of move forward. It looks like we're definitely going to be bigger and better in the future, which is great, and our athletes are continuing to perform all the time.
And it's obviously fantastic that you've managed to start this unique business. You've got to the point where you've got 30 elite athletes in board. You've got massive ambitions. They're already winning world championships, etc. You've got a real good team of athletes that you're looking after. But what does the future look like for DIS? What are your aspirations, and how far do you want to take it?
Yeah, so our first aspiration is really to be a financially strong business so that we know that we can continue year on year on year. Following that, we then want to look at potentially franchising into other counties so that we can replicate the model across the UK, and ultimately so that GB wins kind of Olympic Games every 4 years that it happens. That's the ultimate dream for us, and obviously in doing that, giving athletes the best possible chance of being successful.
And how many athletes at DIS have you got competing in the next Olympics representing Derbyshire?
Well, the Olympic qualification for 2020 doesn't finish until April 2020, so we won't know for sure. At the moment, we think we've got around 11 athletes from Derbyshire going through that qualification process of trying. If you compare Rio, just sort of 3 and a bit years ago, we had 3 athletes from Derbyshire Institute of Sport and 1 athlete from Derbyshire that wasn't within our programme, so it's quite an incredible increase.
We've talked about obviously the sponsorship and the advantages that business get and the benefits from sponsoring DIS. You hold events, connect events, where potential sponsors and current sponsors can turn up to, and they can talk to the coaches and the athletes. And I've been to one myself, and it is genuinely a fascinating evening. It's a really good event to turn up to. When is your next connect event, and what type of people are you looking for to turn up there?
So the next event is on the 16th of October. It's 6 till 7:30 at the University of Derby. Each event we have one of our expert staff delivering a presentation followed by an athlete Q&A. So the next one we've got Dr. Phil Clark talking about the importance of sleep. So we would say it's the best performance enhancing drug, and I guess from a business perspective it relates straight back into that world. In terms of the people that we'd like to attend, anybody that is really looking to connect with us, if anybody is out there looking for where they want to put their sponsorship or how they want to kind of be recognised as a business to be world class, then we'd love to have them involved, come along, see what we do, see if they like it, and then make the decision from there.
And that date again, it's the 16th of October, 6 till 7:30, Derby Uni.
Yes.
So if you're interested in backing a great cause and helping to put Derbyshire on the sporting map, then get yourself down there. And my final question for the interview, Chloe, if people want to find out more about the Derbyshire Institute of Sport, where can we find you?
You can have a look on our website, derbyshireis.co.uk. Again, we're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, which I believe you're going to put in terms of the links, or they can simply email me, Chloe Maudsley at derbyshireis.co.uk.
Yeah, and if anybody does want to get in touch with Chloe and the team, all of the links that we've talked about will be on the blog. You can get there by visiting www.benjaminbrain.co.uk, and there will be all the show notes and any relevant resources that we've talked about in the interview. Well, that brings it to an end, Chloe. Thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on the show. Really enjoyed talking to you about those parallels between elite sport and the business world. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'd like to wish you and the team the very best of luck for the future. We'll be watching out for you at all the major sporting events, and definitely those Olympics coming up in 2020. community. To the listeners, thank you very much for tuning in. Look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of The Truth About Business. One final thing before you go. If you enjoyed this interview and want to make sure you don't miss out on the next episode with another real-life business champion, make sure you subscribe via iTunes, Spotify, your favourite podcast app, or by visiting my blog at benjaminbrain.co.uk and hitting subscribe. At the blog, you'll also find the show notes to this episode, which includes all the relevant links to the website, social media channels, contact details, and anything else that was discussed in the episode. Just type in the name of the guest, and that will bring that right up for you. And finally, I'm always on the search for great business owners who would be happy to spare just a couple of hours of the time to share their business experience with our audience. So if you know of anyone that would make a great guest, or you'd like to feature yourself, just let me know. Send an email to hello@benjaminbrain.co.uk and I'll reply personally as soon as possible. Also, if you've got any feedback, questions that you'd like me to ask our guests, or any other suggestions, I am definitely all ears. That email address again is hello@benjaminbrain.co.uk. So that's it for this episode. I just want to thank you sincerely for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay hungry, stay fearless, get out there and make it happen.